First of all, I want to thank the panel for attending. I know it takes some time out of your day to come and join us here, so thank you for that. And also thank you to the sponsors. Yeah, we want to keep this a little lively. So first of all, I want to kind of go out to the audience and really ask a basic, simple question. I mean, how many of you have gone home at the end of a long day and you're expecting one of those Amazon Prime packages or a UPS package or FedEx and you don't see it? How many in here? Yeah. Yeah, and what do? You go right away, you go online, you get the tracking number, and you figure out, oh, it's still on the truck. Why? Or another good one here, because we're all a very mobile culture, and you're sitting on an airplane, and the captain comes on and before pushback says, well, we have to make a small repair. We're waiting for a part. And the mechanic will be here shortly, and it'll only be 5 minutes. And you look at your watch, and it's an hour later. How many have experienced that? Okay, yeah. So where is some of the issues at? Well, today we're going to kind of break them down into 3 areas here, as far as the logistics footprint. Matt Wicks here from Honeywell, we're going to concentrate on him on the whole inside the warehouse. Ken from Boeing is going to be looking at it from the long, deep supply chain and what it takes to get that supply into a major manufacturing. And Chris, looking at what we're calling the observation technology. With the advent of satellites, I think Andy Barrett was telling me last night that there's roughly less than 1,500 satellites in the air in the space from an observation point of view. That's supposed to rise to over 15,000 in a short period of time. So there's going to be a lot of concentration on observation technology as it's looking down and how it's going to look at that supply chain or logistics footprint. You hear a lot what's going on with regards to autonomous vehicles. Well, the autonomous vehicle is supposed to be about a $26 billion industry. What does that logistics footprint look like to support those autonomous vehicles that are out in the market space? Whether that's a car, whether that's a truck, or a ship, or even an airplane. What does that look like to keep that supply chain going? So what I'd like to do is kind of start here with you, Matt, from a warehouse automation perspective. Robots have been used for a period of time inside the warehouse. What has been the catalyst for all this expansion recently?
Yeah, right. So we've seen robots, right, for 25, 30 years out there in the industry. We've probably all seen in the manufacturing space, going down the production line, manufacturing a car. Well, it's because the robots already know, they have a whole lot of prior knowledge about what that car is going to look like, where those welds are going to go in. The robotic systems in general have been really optimized to be able to be focused in on manufacturing and uses that prior knowledge. But in the warehouse, I don't know how many of you have been in a warehouse before, but they're a really chaotic environment. There's different boxes and pallets and hardware throughout the facilities, and it is difficult for robots to necessarily function in this space because of this chaos. Even down to the items that we're actually buying off of Amazon, the variability in those products. Robots traditionally haven't been very successful at being able to do that. So what's changing now is we're seeing the adaptation of things like computer vision, machine learning, a bunch of discussions like we had this morning about AI. All of those things are being applied to enable robotics robotic solutions to be able to function in the warehouse and actually provide value to our end customers and be able to quickly turn around those orders that you buy a lot faster. See, I thought we were going to get the blame for it.
Yeah.
But we're trying to actually help you get that sooner than you have been able to do it. So, yeah, we're seeing this evolution in the robotic industry to be able to adapt to this, and we're really only scratching the surface here. Some of the metrics we saw earlier this morning about the level of capabilities of AI systems to be able to interpret language, and there was something like 80% of success rate, which is pretty phenomenal for some of the metrics that we're talking about. But if you think about, well, what if I was at 80% of my performance for getting you that order? That means 20% of the time you don't get the right order. And so we still have a lot of room to go, but we're certainly leveraging a lot of these technologies to be able to enable robots to be able to do more than they've ever done before.
Good, thank you. Ken, when you are looking at your supply chain from a manufacturing perspective, and I know just from experience working with you at Boeing a number of years ago, you looked at the whole, it's a real global supply chain that you're dealing with. I mean, when you take a look at that, what are you seeing in that, what we call long, deep supply chain in order to support the manufacturing process or support the remanufacturing process?
Yeah, so, for our company, we spend about 2/3 to 3/4 of our revenue. We buy somewhere in the world. And so when you look at our airplane programs, and I'll use 787, which is our newest airplane, we actually had to modify 747s into what we call the Dream Lifters to be able to bring large structural parts from overseas. So now think about you're buying a wing from Japan. The company in Japan who's building that wing for you is getting their materials from all over the world. They're getting their materials from all over the world. And so that supply chain gets to be very, very long, very, very deep, and very, very complex, as Vince talked about. And so how we not only transport, but just as importantly, how do we keep track of visibility into where things are coming? Because also, a good portion of our business is for governments, and they have strong regulations. So I can't get titanium from Russia for a U.S. government program. But in commercial, I rely heavily on titanium from Russia. So how do you make sure your surety of supply? You can look your DoD customer in the eye and say, absolutely, this titanium was smelt in the United States. It was not smelt in Russia. Or, other regulations around conflict minerals in Africa, and I could go on and on. So there's a whole regulatory piece of this as well as the commercial piece of how we go about this. And as all of our companies become more global, 70% of our revenue comes from outside the United States. So we cannot afford to have just a domestic supply chain building our products. We have to be global. It provides access, it provides opportunity, it does provide cost advantage. And so as we do this, we are really working hard on what are the visibility tools. How do you know what that third and fourth tier supplier is? Because that third or fourth tier supplier, it might be $1,000 part that holds up a $200 million delivery. And so that's an area that we're spending a lot of time on. Love to hear anybody who has a solution for us on that.
I have to laugh. Ken brings back a memory. And my previous career, I had a logistics software solution that the Boeing company heavily used. And when one of those parts was $1,000 part or whatever part didn't make it, Ken was always on the phone to me, so I was getting the blame.
Yeah, then I bought his company, so he's pretty happy then.
Last laugh. Yeah, I guess I got the last laugh. Yeah. So, Chris, from the observation technology and just piggybacking off of Ken, I mean, where do you see that going? We talked about the glut of satellites that are going to be in orbit here. I mean, where do you see that impacting that whole logistics footprint from a global perspective, both in terms of from a Lockheed perspective or from a venture or investing perspective?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Just a little background on Lockheed. I'm kind of the odd man out here. I run the venture capital group, so these guys are deep into the manufacturing. I mean, Lockheed is, I would say, 99% a government supplier, both to U.S. and foreign governments, and most of the time, a production run of our products is one. So you can imagine our supply chain, what it looks like. I think last count, we had 37,000 unique suppliers, multiple in every state, multiple in every territory of the country, and several in foreign countries allied with the United States, like Italy and Japan and a few places buying our products. So it's a very, very interesting supply chain problem that we have to deal with, and trying to coordinate all that in a company that has been doing what it's been doing for over 100 years, basically amongst 4 or 5 fiefdoms within inside the company, and trying to coordinate is quite the issue and quite the problem for us to deal with. And I think we're in the midst of trying to digitally reorient ourselves to doing that, but our volumes don't really lend itself to a high level of automation, at least at the vehicle side, right? At automating the warehouse and other things, we're looking heavily into that, and we're looking at investments in those spaces as well to figure that out. But we have a very different challenge than the folks here, and Boeing certainly has to deal with. So now to your question on observation, right? This is an area that we've been investing in. We've done 3 investments in this space already. Obviously, Space 2.0 or 3.0, wherever you call it right now, is a huge area. It's raised about $25 billion in capital gone in the last decade and a half, and it's going to be crowded. And I think what you're seeing is there's only been one successful exit in the space, all that time, Skybox, and there's going to be a lot of imploding startup companies, I think, in that area. When you look at ways of observing the Earth, there are not too many different styles of doing it, and there's many duplicated companies putting up constellations out there. So initially, it's going to be great for producers. There's going to be a lot of data probably available very cheaply, which means that you can do very interesting things with it. But which of those companies are going to sustain through that? That's going to be the question. And many of them have very duplicative business models and technologies. And I think we're going to go through this kind of bubble burst, and then we're going to see, like somebody said last night, that kind of emergence of the companies that really benefit from it going on. But the types of data that will be available to the public individual will be the same types that are available to the government today. You're going to see all manner of electro-optical observation, RF signals intelligence, IR, hyperspectral imaging, and now SAR, which is synthetic aperture radar. So this is distance measurement at a distance, and even LiDAR coming to bear. So you'll be able to track individual things with very repeatable granularity, frequency, and so on. Once you've got 6 or 8 satellites up there, you can start tracking every hour things at virtually any spot on the Earth. So the level of data available to augment your supply chain logistics is just going to go up astronomically if those companies survive. And kind of the joke right now is, the third owner of the golf course is the one who makes profit. People are starting to apply that to satellite constellations as well.
So do you see some of those new entrants only concentrating on just one piece of that market space and not really looking at the whole aggregate from the logistics footprint that's needed?
Yeah, they're not looking end to end. And in fact, it's kind of funny. Like I was at a Stanford aerospace meeting a couple days ago, and I listened to the founder of Skybox talk about how they were so focused on just making this extraordinary capability and then launching this satellite. When it got up there, they thought, they just have customers come out of the woodwork, and the customers said, well, where's the historical data? We want 2 years of backlog, and we want a sweet user interface that we can pick any spot on the Earth. And, they were just so focused on making this extraordinary asset, they forgot that no one really wants to own a satellite. They want the data that comes off it. So kind of integrating that into the problems that need to be solved is lacking a little bit on some of these companies. They're so focused on creating this constellation and a stream of data, they're not looking at the problems that they need to solve. Kind of like the what we heard from the Microsoft guy this morning, that end thing is what problems are you solving? You can have all
Right.
this wonderful technology, but if it's not doing something for somebody, then what value is
Yeah,
it?
what the practicality of it. No, that's a very good point. Thanks. Matt, on from the robotics, getting kind of back on inside the warehouses and a robotics point of view, what are some of the trends that are driving that you're seeing, mainly, say, from a fulfillment perspective?
Yeah, so there's two primary trends that I see in robotics. So there's the technical piece, which is leveraging sensing technology, AI, that is enabling these robotic solutions to go actually even just function inside of the warehouse. But not necessarily just function, but actually function at a cost point that actually makes economic sense for our end customers. So that's a key driver here. The other one is the labor. So labor availability. As we continue to buy more and more things online, the demands put on the warehousing operations in the growth in e-commerce and order fulfillment is exceeding the capacity of the available labor. So companies are turning to robotics to be able to augment that workforce to continue to grow and expand their business to be productive in this space. So it's things like not necessarily replacing the individuals, but putting them into a role that they can be more optimized for those human level tasks. So we talked about Fetch Robotics earlier this morning. They have a mobile robotic product. So instead of having a person wandering around the warehouse going and picking your item for fulfillment, now we can have a robot that actually can bring those items to that individual and then have the person do the task of doing that picking operation. So that's a very powerful piece. My organization has developed a robotic truck unloader. So one of the most miserable jobs inside of a warehouse is to unload a tractor trailer. So on a nice spring day, it's not too bad, but you talk about in the middle of summer in Phoenix, Arizona, it's just a miserable job. And so you have a tremendous amount of turnover. And so we are trying to get those individuals out of the trailer by using automated robotic equipment and putting them into a position to man several robots doing that unloading operation. So you take that workforce, continue to use them to maintain multiple different pieces of robotic equipment, put them into a higher value job, increase the retention rates, and be able to increase the productivity of your applications. So,
Good. Ken, from the warehouse automation point of view, what are some of your thoughts of it being used on either on the commercial side or on the government side, or even on the services side where you're residing right now?
Yeah, so, and I'll pick up on some of those comments. First and foremost, when we look at robotics, it's more about augmentation to the people, and our first focus is on safety. And so whether it be a very hot day in the desert or heavy items, off-shape items, whatever it might be, whether it be in our factories and our warehouses, we're really focused on robotics and automation to be a supplement to labor, as described. And the first thing we look at is safety. And that's a little bit counterintuitive because normally you think about it in terms of economics, but we actually start with safety because in our company, our incident rates in our warehouses are almost as high as they are in our factories. And so it's how do you start doing that? And then when you think about automation, it really starts about, and then when you start talking about the economics is if you have a slow moving warehouse, you can never, ever have automation where you're going to make money on it, right? Because you're going to go dump 5, 10, 15 million, $20 million into a warehouse to supplement 5 people or 10 people. You know, your pick rates are low, your volumes are low. It's abnormal, it's non-standard. So to do all your programming around that, and I would say in aerospace and defense, automation around in the warehouse. I remember 20, 25 years ago, every avionics company you went into, including Honeywell, they had these big pick towers. Everything was automated. Everything was brought. And after about 5 years, they all went away because financially they weren't viable, but they sounded really cool and they made a really good tour for customers. So that went away. But now as price points have come down and technology has evolved so much, we've seen more of that. You know, in my business, I have, I don't know, 5-10 million square feet of warehousing, and only 2 of them do we highly rely on automation. One of them is state-of-the-art automation because it is high volume, relatively small package size, and a lot of repetitive work. And in that case, automation works really, really well. But when we have big warehouse, no offense, but if you have a 777 landing gear that's as big as this room, you're not going to have automation, right? You're going to have a forklift, and you're going to have people moving it around. So there's a blend between the two, and that's what we spend a lot of time on.
So I'm going to chime in here just one moment. So I think there was a very good observation here about the size and the level of automation. Not everybody can afford a $15-20 million highly automated solution. So that's another piece to where I think robotics do fit into play. Is the point of entry is much lower. You know, if you have a mobile robot, you don't have to spend a whole lot of money to get that in and actually start to see some benefit in a very early stage. So instead of having to buy a fully automated conveyance and sortation system or an ASRS like you referenced, you can get in there at a lot lower price point, and recognize the value much easier.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chris, in preparing for this discussion, I mean, a lot of things talked about more data, the transparency of data, but from a data security perspective or a supplier security perspective, and where do you see the observation technology playing a role in that so that you can have some repeatability in strengthening that supply chain, both from a supplier point of view and that standardization point of view?
Yeah, this is an area I became familiar with a couple of weeks ago when we had our whole IT leadership out. We were meeting startups in the Valley, and one of the issues that kept coming up is supplier qualification. And I mentioned 2 years ago we had 37,000 suppliers. This year I checked again, we have 25,000 suppliers. So where did all those suppliers go? So there was a lot of consolidation, but when I looked at the names, there was a 10% flip in the number of suppliers. So there were several thousand new suppliers added. You probably have the same problem all the time. And we had to go out, apparently, to guarantee the DoD requirements that we have to adhere to and ITAR restrictions and everything that Ken talked about. We have to literally go out and audit all those companies, right? And we usually hire Deloitte or somebody to go do it for us at great expense. But you can imagine this is millions upon millions of dollars a year that we spend just trying to make sure these people are who they say they are. They buy their parts from where they say they are. They deliver from us in the way they say they are. So what we became very aware of, that people are starting to look at how can we automate that? How can we start looking at all the data sources and get that to the point that it does meet the DoD requirements? And can we use some automated way to approve people, at least initially, to give us first articles and then eventually enter our supply chain? So I didn't realize it's as huge a problem as, but even we're spending tens of millions of dollars a year just trying to make sure we're working with the people who they say they are. Simple as that. You probably have the same problem.
Well, my good friend Janet Duffy, who one of my peers at Lockheed, we grew up in a period of how do you reduce your supply base, optimize your supply base, increase your supply base. So you go through all those different phases depending on what you're trying to do as a company. And it is terribly expensive in aerospace because of our standards and because of safety of the products that we build to qualify somebody, right? They have to not only have all the certifications, but they have to have the demonstrated performance, so what they're doing each day, they're doing it the right way. And so it is a challenge for all of us. But going back to satellites, I think the question there is who's going to make the money, right? I mean, when you look at telecommunications, and we've the two companies here are the two leaders in satellites in the United States, and or does it go down a GPS route where the government does some of this on behalf of? So I think it's going to be fascinating over the next decade.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's glad that there is a government hand there, because without GPS, a lot of these things, that we rely on. When you talk to people about their cell phone, they don't even realize where those signals come from and how they do. And we're in the midst of rebuilding that whole system.
Yes.
GPS 3 is going up now, and a year and a half, you're going to have a completely different system talking to your phone and providing more accuracy and better jammability and a bunch of other stuff that's going on. And that's not a nickel is going to be paid by any company who uses it. It's all government funded.
Great, thanks. So we got time for one more question. So hopefully we'll be back here next year, this time. And where would you like to see the industry from your perspective as it relates to your particular job function right now? Where would you like to see that in a year?
Yeah, so historically, logistics operations run at a pretty slow pace.
Very slow, yeah.
Yeah. So where I'd like to see things is a continuation in the direction that we're headed here. A lot more robotic solutions. Right now, 80% of warehousing operations are done manually today. Mm-hmm. So it's a space that is very ripe for automated solutions, and I think the robotic solutions are geared to do that. So a year from now, I'd like to see more robots.
More robots. Okay. Ken, what's your thoughts?
I'll take a flyer here. Brexit solved and China tariffs resolved. No, I mean, that is what's driving me crazy. Where do I have inventory positioned around the world and how my supply chains are configured around the world? Brexit and what's going on with, the China negotiations, today, that is more important than anything in a warehouse or anything else, because if you think about, many of our supply chains or other supply chains, they're global. And so when you have customers that are flying your products, whether it be a Lockheed Martin F-35 or a Boeing 777 that is both in England and in Italy, right? Where do you position your inventory? Pre-Brexit, post-Brexit? You got to have it both places, right? And then in the commercial world for us, China's our biggest market, both as a buyer and a seller. So that's, to me, the most important thing for my organization.
Chris?
The whole previous part of the conference was about AI, and I think you can imagine I'm sitting in some meetings with some pretty scary people every once in a while and hear some of the new threats that are emerging. And one of the ones that is really troubling to us right now is people creating data sets to spoof AI, actually to train it in a bad way or figure out how to defeat it. So as people are going to more autonomous systems, other bad actors are trying to figure out how to take advantage of the holes in those systems and use them for bad purposes right now. I think we've seen a couple of weeks ago AI image recognition systems where a gentleman had a picture of a face below his face, and then the whole system couldn't understand what a face was. And when you apply that to all the areas that we work in, whether it's logistics or some of the defense stuff we're in, that's actually pretty scary, because now we're into the AI and now the anti-AI, and we'll be into anti-AI, and it's just a crazy escalation, but it's real and it's happening now, and trying to figure out how to deal with it is something that we're looking at as well.
Right, thanks. I think we have time for maybe one question. Maybe we don't. Oh, go ahead. What is that?
Running a massive global supply chain with where the provenance of each item is of utmost importance and you're trying to keep control seems like a very fertile testing ground for blockchain. So can you talk about any use cases you have either internally or with your third-party suppliers?
Yeah, we're heavily engaged in blockchain, but candidly, we're probably going to be a mid to late adopter. Because we need the technology to be proven out at scale before we do it, for all those reasons you talk about, because the last thing we need to do is go get in blockchain and then a bad actor figures out how to get in there, break it, and then we have an assurity of supply issue, which then brings into safety concerns. So we are staying, our IT and technology groups are staying very, very involved with it, and we're doing some, I'll say, ad hoc pilots. But I would be surprised if we are an early adopter at scale. We're probably going to be, like I said, mid to late, just because of the complexities and probably, like my colleague here from Lockheed, a major concern around security, and because we do know of a lot of bad actors in that space. But, Chris, over to you on that, because you guys are kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, and we've taken the approach where we're deploying it now. It's operational in certain parts of the business for very specific tasks. We're using it mostly for guaranteeing the provenance of software releases to the airframe, so we're not using it for the logistics pipeline right now. But as you can imagine, in the factory, there's a lot of stuff moving back and forth. You want to make sure that that rev of software that just got into the F-35 ICU actually is the one you wanted in there. So we're using it for rev control, and it's fully deployed now. They're operating right now. So the expectation is to start expanding that broader over time.
All right, I want to thank the panel again. Thank you for your time. I think it was very insightful, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.